Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Chris. Together we're the Gen X couple.
Hey guys!
Take one. Hello, everyone.
Hopefully we have this a little more together than the last episode. Thank you so much for coming back. Tonight we're actually going to talk about a story that Chris and I heard on a ghost tour in Boston. And I thought it was kind of interesting, so I figured you guys might find it interesting as well. It's the story of a duel, a brutal legend, and the place, Castle Island in Boston Harbor, where a very young Edgar Allan Poe first heard whispers of a fate as chilling as anything he would later put on paper. It's the story of how a man was said to have been walled alive and how that tale, told in the echoing chambers of an old fort, haunted Poe's imagination for the rest of his life.
Is Castle Island the one that has the burgers and
Yes,
crinkly
Sully's.
fries?
Yes, Sully's.
Very good. Go check it out.
Sullivan's, I think, but we call it Sully's. Yeah, it's chef's kiss, delicious.
Yeah. So, Edgar Allan Poe is familiar to many as a master of the macabre.
Macabre.
The man who wrote about buried corpses, creeping dread, psychological terror, and the darkness that stalks human minds. But most people don't know how much of his early creative fire was shaped by real places and real stories. He encountered in New England none more dramatic than Fort Independence on Castle Island in Boston Harbor. Now, Poe didn't grow up with Gothic tales in his cradle, but by the age of 18, he had begun to see them in stones beneath his boots and the shadows around him. In 1827, he enlisted in the U.S. Army under the alias Edgar Allan Perry. His first posting was as a private at Fort Independence, a rambling stone fort that had been defending Boston's harbor for generations.
Yeah, you can actually tour the fort.
It is.
Did I do it with you?
Yeah.
I know I did it at one point in my life.
We took the boys.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you can actually go on a tour. I don't know if it was free or like just a few dollars, but it's actually really cool if you like that sort of thing. They do it in the summers, I think. And then you can get Sully's while you're there for lunch. Castle Island was not a scenic park back in Poe's day, of course. It was a working artillery post. There were thick stone bastions. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
I'm asking you. Narrow corridors leading deep into fort walls, unknown vaults where powder and supplies were stored, and shadows that seemed to whisper with every gust of the wind off of the Atlantic. Soldiers stationed there told stories. Of course, every fort had them. But there was one tale that stuck around long after the truth had faded, and it was this tale that Poe walked into when he first stepped through those gates.
So the story begins with two young men, officers at the fort well before Poe's arrival. One was Lieutenant Robert Massie, the other Lieutenant Gustavus Drane. You had to be there in 1817 to know them. Massie was popular with the men, affable, steady, well-liked. Drane was ambitious, quick-tempered, and increasingly resentful towards Massie's easy camaraderie. So, on Christmas Day in 1817, the tension boiled over, and according to every period account and correspondence that survives today, the two men had been drinking and playing cards. Tempers flared. What began as a dispute over money and pride turned into an accusation and then a challenge. In that era, military officers still clung stubbornly to the ideas of honor and reputation. Even though dueling was technically illegal, or at least discouraged in many northern cities, officers still met behind the scenes to settle scores. And on Castle Island, with its isolated ramparts facing the cold ocean, that meeting took place.
Yeah, the duel was swift. Swords were drawn at dawn. The cold gray winter grass laced with salt spray from the harbor. We're being very literary here. But anyway, that became the stage for the confrontation that was over in just moments. Massie was struck badly. Drane, whose blade found its mark, stood trembling over his fallen rival. Massie died. That much is beyond dispute. His burial site is marked near the fort cemetery, and it was visible to Poe when he arrived a decade later. Soldiers on Castle Island told visitors about it, and Poe could have even read that inscription himself, with the name, the date, and the somber tribute, and understood instantly that some stories don't end with burial.
But here's where the lore becomes grisly and haunting. Now, among the soldiers stationed on the island long after the duel took place, a darker version of events took hold in Camp Gossip. That version was less about battlefield honor and more about revenge among comrades. According to this tale, Drane's fellow officers were so enraged by Massie's death, believing it wasn't honor but personal malice or arrogance, that they decided justice should be more than a written reprimand. The soldiers, not court-martialed, not commanding officers, but the men who had lost a brother, decided to take matters into their own hands. In that version, they got Drane drunk. They coaxed him down into one of the fort's sealed-off vaults or storage casements, chambers with low ceilings, iron doors, and stone walls that echoed every sound. These were places soldiers didn't often use except for supplies or ammunition storage. In the legend, once Drane was there and too inebriated to resist,
close enough,
they chained him to the wall, sealed the iron door behind him, and set the stones and bricks in place so no light, no sound, no escape was possible. In that cruel imaging, Drane was left there to die, walled alive, forgotten beneath Castle Island's ramparts.
Think about the fear in that image, though. You're confined in total darkness, you're unable to move, and there's stone pressing in on every side of you. That's the kind of thing that can torment someone's mind over and over again. And this version of events, as gruesome as it was what Poe heard as not the dry court record, not the real aftermath, but the shadowy story told by soldiers in the barracks. And it was repeated during watches and late night shifts. And it's important to be clear, the actual historical record doesn't support the walled alive version. In reality, Drane survived the duel, he faced inquiry, he continued on with his military career and died of natural causes many years later. The embellished tale was folklore, but in a mind like Edgar Allan Poe's, the folklore was fuel.
Exactly.
And he's brilliant. I'm sorry.
Yes.
His work is beyond brilliant.
So it wasn't just the story, it was the place. Castle Island's fort was built of heavy granite and limestone. Its passageways were narrow and echoing.
Yeah, I feel like we already said that. So you would start...
So Poe was very sensitive to the environment. He didn't just hear stories, he felt them. Imagining a young Poe pacing the ramparts at dusk, watching ships entering the harbor under gray skies, hearing distant gulls cry against the wind, and thinking about what it would be like to be buried alive with breath in your lungs, waiting against stone.
Later in his life, in 1846, Edgar Allan Poe published the Cask of Amontillado. It was the first in Godey's Lady's Book. And in that story, Montresor narrates his plan to exact revenge on Fortunato, which is a man who had insulted him. I think I read this in 7th grade. I feel like...
Yeah, me too.
I feel like 7th graders are too young for this kind of thing. But anyway, it's still brilliant. But anyway, Montresor lures Fortunato into his family's underground catacombs under the pretext of sampling a rare wine, Amontillado. And once they are deep in the earth, sealed away from everyone else, Montresor traps Fortunato inside a narrow recess and begins laying brick over brick, sealing the niche until Fortunato is completely entombed. The horror of the story is not just that Fortunato will die, but that he will live for a time after the wall is complete. Completely aware of the cold stone, the narrowing walls, the absence of light and sound, and that's kind of a slow fade into helplessness. I don't know how long a person can survive without food and water. I think it's like 3 weeks or something. And that's the fear that the Castle Island legend tapped into. The terror of being alive and enclosed, but unreachable by everyone outside.
Now, Poe never directly said, I based this on what I heard at Castle Island, but the parallels are significant. The legends of a man confined inside stone walls, left to meet his end in silence, clearly resonates with the central device in the Cask of Amontillado.
Yes. You guys know what he means.
Even the tone, the calm deliberation with which he bricks up his victims, mirrors the cold logic of the soldiers' embellished revenge story. And legend gave Poe a template for the psychological horror of entrapment, and he turned it into fiction almost 2 decades later.
Yeah, and the fort itself seemed to want to keep telling the tales. Decades after Poe's time there, workers renovating Fort Independence in the early 1900s uncovered what was described in local newspapers as a sealed casement, which was a small walled-off chamber that didn't match the fort's known layout. Inside was a skeleton in an old military-era uniform, possibly even with remnants of chains. There's no definitive proof that the skeleton was a duelist or a privately punished man, but the find only fueled the legend. Locals at the time immediately linked the discovery back to the Duel story, interpreting the bones as evidence that someone really had been walled alive inside the fort. Newspapers, of course, ran sensational headlines. The ghost tour sprang up, which is where we originally heard the story, except I believe on that story, they told us that Poe witnessed the walled alive, didn't they?
Yeah, I think they said he was there at that time.
Yeah, so there's like all kinds of versions out there. And basically, Castle Island became a place where the line between history and legend completely blurred.
Now, it's just not the Duel legend. Castle Island itself was thick with eerie anecdotes. Soldiers spoke of footsteps echoing in rooms long abandoned, phantom voices in the barracks after lights were out, and lanterns swaying in hallways where no one stood. Fishermen in the harbor claimed to hear rattling chains in the fog, and lighthousekeepers told tales of foghorns sounding without warning long after midnight. And all these were kinds of stories that young Poe heard while he was stationed there, stories that became a psychological building block, influencing his tales about entrapment and fear.
He skipped over the Cask of Amontillado. And Castle Island was really only part of it. Even after he left the army, Poe did return periodically to New England. Boston's foggy streets and maritime culture remained part of his memory, of course. He knew, the unsettling fog would roll off the harbor, and he knew the chill of a winter dawn and the echoing corridors of old architecture. And all of that stuff ended up finding its way into stories like The Pit and the Pendulum, where confinement becomes psychological terror, or The Black Cat, where walls themselves hold evidence of guilt. The settings in Poe's work, meaning the crypts, basements, hidden chambers, sealed rooms, they echo not just the Gothic tradition, but real spaces he experienced or heard about here in New England.
Yes, and even the soundscape, gulls crying at night, waves pounding against seawalls, foghorns moaning in the distance, lantern flames sputtering against stone, became part of the psychological texture of his fiction.
Yeah, why don't you tell them this part?
So if we walk the walls of Fort Independence, and you can read the old weathered gravestones of soldiers from the 19th century and stand where Poe once stood, it's not hard to imagine the echoes of these stories whispering through the ramparts. The wind off the harbor...
What is a rampart? I know it's in the Star Spangled Banner. I don't even know what a rampart is.
I think it's like a tower in a castle where the soldiers look out.
Isn't that a turret?
Same thing. Like along the edge.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Thank you. I don't know. We don't know. You guys can email me if you know. Google it yourselves.
So that's the core of tonight's episode. Real history morphing into legend, and legend feeding imagination, and imagination becoming literature that has haunted readers for nearly 2 centuries.
Yeah, so the key takeaways are Edgar Allan Poe is awesome. Visit Castle Island if you get a chance and take the tour of the fort.
And have a burger and fries.
Have a burger and fries at Sully's. And come back and thank us. You're welcome. It's phenomenal. It's a great day and it's free. You can...
Yeah.
I think they charge like a few dollars to...
Park?
No, they don't charge to park. Well, at least not the last time we were there, but for the tour.
Oh, okay.
And it's only, I think they only do it like weekends or like one Sunday a month. I don't know. Go do it. Check it out. Read Edgar Allan Poe if you're old enough because it's like some heavy stuff, but it is phenomenal. He's one of the greatest writers of all time. And that's all I have for you. I wonder if I have any pictures to put on Instagram of Castle Island. I should look.
Yeah.
I should somewhere. Plus, too, it's really close to Logan, and you can sit and eat your burger and watch the planes take off. It's really cool. Okay, the end.
All right. See you later, alligator.
In a wild crocodile.